Hey guys, Tweak here from the Mulligan, and today for you I've got a budget deck tech. Now I'm calling this one Noxious Artistry, and let's jump right in. Now the first card I want to talk about today is called Glintnest Crane. It's a 1/3 for a colorless and a blue. It has flying, and it has, when Glintnest Crane enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Now this card's great because it's a flyer. That gives it evasion. Allows us to swing over the top. It also allows us to block other flyers. It's a great body at 1/3, which means it'll survive, things with 2 power or less. And has strong synergy with Contraband Kingpin that I want to talk about in a minute. Now as far as the cons with the card goes is it will die to Smuggler's Copter, which you will run into. And 1 power is fairly weak. It's not really going to clean anything up for us. But getting on to the next card, Contraband Kingpin, the card that I sort of want this one to work together with. It's a 1/4 for a blue and a black. It has lifelink, and it has whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. So lifelink is great. It's going to keep us in the game longer, let us hit our goals for the deck. And it's a great body at 1/4. It's going to survive things with 3 power. It's going to be slightly trickier for them to deal with. The problem with Contraband Kingpin is it's 2 colors at a 2 cost, which means it's going to be a little trickier for us to cast. And there's also other things on curve at the 2 slot that we would also like to cast, but Contraband Kingpin is always our first cast. Now the interesting thing with Contraband Kingpin and Glintnest Crane is once we have them both on the battlefield, we can cast an artifact card and then sequence the events how we like. So if we cast any artifact, we could choose to look at the top 4 cards of our library, reveal an artifact card and put the rest on the bottom in any order, and then scry 1. Or if we really want to look at 5 cards, we can scry 1, see if it's an artifact or not that we'd want to keep with Glintnest Crane. If it isn't, bottom it, and then we get to look at the next 4. So through that sequence of events, we're seeing 5 cards, which is fantastic value. Now the next card I want to talk about is Prakhata Pillarbug. Now it's a 2/3 for 3 colorless. It also has the ability pay a black. It gains lifelink until end of turn. So again, this sort of enabled lifelink is going to keep us in the game for longer, keep our train rolling. It's a good body at 2/3. 2 power is going to let it deal with some of our opponent's creatures, and it's on curve at both the 3rd and 4th sort of slot. Because if we cast it 3rd turn, we're sort of going to have to play slightly more defensive with it because we can't trade with the lifelink. And if we cast it on 4th turn, we will be able to pay that lifelink immediately depending on the mana that we leave up. Now next one off the list is Self-Assembler. It's a 4/4 for 5, and when Self-Assembler enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an assembly worker creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So the great thing about this card is it fetches for itself. It's a 4/4, which makes it a great body. It's easy to cast because it's all colorless mana. It's the only card on the 5 slot of the curve, and it works wonders with our engine that we've got going on. So if you've got both parts of our engine on the field, the Glintnest and the Contraband Kingpin, or either, we cast this card, and then we can go digging for another one if we don't see the cards we want off of the top. Now, Marionette Master is a 1/3, costs 4 and 2 black. It's a bit of a silver bullet in our deck that is designed to deal with Wrath of God effects. It has Fabricate 3, so when this creature enters the battlefield, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, or create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. It also has, whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. This card is in the deck to deal with board wipes, to deal with things like Fumigate, or any of the negative power and toughness abilities. If they're going to wipe our board, we want Marionette Master on the field, just so that we punish them for all the artifacts that we have out. It is a fairly costly card, but I feel that it's important if we can stabilize towards the end of the game there. Now on to Noxious Gearhulk. It's a 5/4 for 4 and 2 black. It has Menace, and when Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. Now this is the bread and butter of the deck. This is the goal. This is what we're trying to achieve. So through Menace, it has more evasion, which is great, which works great synergy with itself in that you can kill their strongest creature or one of their blockers if they've left 2 up, and then be able to swing in with it. Not the turn it comes out, obviously, because it doesn't have haste, but it will help us shorten their field so that we can get more aggressive. Netting us HP is another big bonus. Our biggest problem is that we will take a lot of hits early and we're going to go down on life, but this card will help us stabilize out and then shoot through to the end. It's sort of weak at 4 toughness in that a lot of the other Gearhulks are sitting at 5 or more. It's also a linchpin of the deck, so if this card gets countered or destroyed, we are in a bit of trouble. But remember, we've got that engine there to search for this card. It is a 4 of in the deck, so if one does get destroyed, hopefully we can dig up another one. The other biggest issue with Noxious Gearhulk is it doesn't help us deal with vehicles, which is sort of okay in that we can kill the pilots that they're going to cast, but obviously not the pilots that are in their hand that they can immediately crew into their vehicles. The big synergy with this card is with Saheeli's Artistry. Now this is our bread and butter card. This is the other card that's going to win us the game. It's 4 colorless and 2 blue. And then we have choose one or both. And guys, we are almost always going to pick both on this one. It has create a token that's a copy of target artifact. And you know what? Noxious Gearhulk happens to be an artifact. It also has create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Oh, well, guess what? Noxious Gearhulk is also a creature. So this card effectively, for the same cost as 1 Gearhulk, lets us cast 2 more. And do not forget about those enter the battlefield triggers that are going to stabilize us out to the end of the game. The problem with Saheeli's Artistry is it happens at sorcery speed. So what this means is we can't just surprise out these Noxious Gearhulks at the end of their turn, and it also makes it a bit trickier to manage counter decks. It is the linchpin of the deck, so if this card does get countered, again we're in a bit of a pickle, but we want to go digging for more Gearhulks with that engine we've set up. Now I've got an array of cards to sort of support this strategy that we're going for. The first one is Workshop Assistant. It is a 1/2 for 3. When Workshop Assistant dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So we want to get this guy out because it sort of makes it a bit scary for the opponent to block. If we've got any of our artifacts in the graveyard, we can apply pressure by either swinging with this guy or leaving him up in defense. If we swing, they're not likely to block because they'll kill him when we fish up our best card. If we use him defensively, they can't attack as aggressively because we can just chump block with this guy, fish our best card out again, and boom, we're back in the game. It is weak at a 1/2 for 3, but we're not in it for its power. Now the other card that works in synergy with this, but in a different sort of way, is Fortuitous Find. Now we get to choose one or both. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, or return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And it's for 2 colorless and a black that we get to cast that. So this is great in that we can target 2 separate Noxious Gearhulks if they end up in our yard, because they are both an artifact and a creature as before, but we can also go fishing for other pieces of our puzzle if we have to. And if really required, we can fish up a Noxious Gearhulk and a Workshop Assistant to be able to be defensive with, and if we've got our engine up, those 2 enter the battlefield triggers when we cast them are going to be great to support us. Again, this is at sorcery speed and it's 3 mana, so it's fairly slow in that with this deck we won't be casting this card and Noxious Gearhulk in the same turn. Now the next card to sort of support our plan is Scrapheap Scrounger. It's a 2 colorless to cast for a 3/2. It can't block, but for a colorless and a black we can exile another creature card from our graveyard, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. Now this card has recursion, which is great. It also has recursion, which is great. It's a swing to win style of card in that it can't block. The problem with this card is it's going to rip stuff out of our graveyard, which sort of goes against our strategy, but it also allows us to immediately reapply pressure to the board after we've had a bad sort of interaction. So this card's great in that if they wipe the field and we need to get back in the game, we just need to hit them a few more times, we can cast this card and get aggressive. Now one of the silver bullets in the deck that I've got is Underhanded Designs. It's a colorless and a black. and it's an enchantment that has whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It also has pay a colorless and a black to sacrifice underhanded designs, destroy target creature. Activate this ability only if you control 2 or more artifacts. If we're going to have a lot of trouble dealing with one of their bombs, this is the card that's going to do it. It's easy for us to have multiple artifacts out on the field, which means that the second ability of this card is almost always going to be up. The other thing to also always keep in mind is that whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, we pay 1, and then they will lose a life, but we will also gain a life. So sometimes just the gaining of life is as important to keep us in the game just long enough to get our bombs off. The other cool thing is to remember this has really good synergy with Marionette Master if we use the servo functionality of her fabricate ability, in that when we fabricate each of those servos as they come in, we can pay 1 for each and then drain some life off our opponent. It's also good that we can leave this on the board after Wrath of God effects, so Fumigate. It's going to hang around. We're not going to be able to use its second ability, but as we try to re-kit ourselves, we're going to be able to deal damage to them. Being later in the game, we should have some spare mana up to be able to activate this. Now, the last card that I want to talk about is Prophetic Prism. It's 2 for when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then pay 1 and tap it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now, you'll understand sort of why this is in here when we look at the lands in a minute, but the other great thing is Prophetic Prism is going to go great with Contraband Kingpin and Glintnest Crane, in that we can sequence this how we want. So, if we've already got Contraband Kingpin out, we cast Prophetic Prism, we can scry 1 and then draw a card. And then, much to the same effect with Glintnest Crane, we can either draw a card beforehand, or we can go digging through our top 4 and then draw a card. It doesn't sort of matter how we sequence this ability, but it lets us see 5 cards just off of that 2 colorless mana cast. Now onto the lands. It's a really basic land setup just because we're going for the budget option. It's 11 islands and 11 swamps. That Prophetic Prism is going to get us out of trouble if we get to the end of the game and we're going to have trouble casting our 2 mana drops. So if Noxious Gearhulk will require 2 black, as long as we've got 1 black or 2 Prophetic Prisms on the field, we should be okay. So we've got a bit of a casual sideboard going on here. We've got Ceremonious Rejection, great for countering other artifact decks. Also, it's always a must sub for when we're coming up against Smuggler's Copter. The next card is Harsh Scrutiny. So target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may choose a creature card from it. That player discards that card. If you know that you're not going to be able to deal with their bomb creature, this is how we're going to get around it. We don't have to cast it first turn, but it also helps us keep Smuggler's Copter and that kind of thing offline. We've got an additional Marionette Master, just in case we run into those Wrath of God decks. If we know that they're going to keep or sub in more damage dealing cards, we've got Marionette Master there to punish them for that. So next card we've got is Morbid Curiosity. It's a colorless and 2 black, and it has, as an additional cost to cast Morbid Curiosity, sacrifice an artifact or creature. Draw cards equal to that converted mana cost of the sacrifice permanent. So this is great if we get set up and we don't need Prophetic Prism anymore. We've used it to draw a card, we've got our mana spread sorted out, we can sacrifice it then to draw 2 more cards and keep our engine rolling. And the last card I want to talk about is Padim, Console of Innovation. Now, I've only got 2 of these in the sideboard because it's a legendary creature, and if we run into it every day of the week, we're in a bit of trouble. So it has artifacts you control have hexproof, which is just brilliant for decks that are going to try and wipe out our key bits of tech. It also has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, draw a card. So this will be easy with Noxious Gearhulk. It's also great with essentially any deck, because as long as we're not versing other artifacts, we should typically have the highest converted mana cost and draw a card off of that. I've also got an ultra budget version of the deck. Now this one's going to be considerably weaker because we're looking at ripping out Noxious Gearhulk and cutting in a Metalwork Colossus. Now Metalwork Colossus is an 11 cost artifact creature. It's a 10/10 and it costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. So those Prophetic Prisms are really going to do some work for us there. If we can get 1 or 2 of those on the board, this is going to bring it back down to the 7 cost range, which is a bit more feasible. But it also has sacrifice 2 artifacts, return Metalwork Colossus from your graveyard to your hand. Now this has some good synergy with Workshop Assistant, in that when Workshop Assistant dies we can fish another artifact back. So if we get 1 Workshop Assistant in our graveyard and then 1 on the field, we can use those triggers to kill 1 Workshop Assistant and then fish another one back. It is going to be a bit trickier to cast, and obviously isn't going to work as well because it won't help us stabilize like Noxious Gearhulk will, but it does cost only $8, so it's going to cut the cost of the deck down from 72 to around about 36, so it is almost cutting it in half there, guys. So that's all I've got for you today, guys. If you've got any suggestions on how to improve this one, drop it in the comments below so that everybody else can learn. Obviously there are many ways to build this deck, and I'd love to hear all your sort of fantastic additions to this one. Alright guys, you enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.